Berlin, May 1945. Smoke drifts across a city of ruins. The Reichstag stands gutted, its flagpole now bearing the red banner of the Soviet Union. Streets are littered with broken helmets, burned trucks, and the stench of a dying empire. Amid the chaos, teams of soldiers, American, British, and Soviet, move not to fight, but to search. They are hunting ghosts, the scientists, engineers, and blueprints that might define the next war before the current one has even ended. Inside a shattered aircraft hangar on the outskirts of Dessau, Soviet officers push open steel doors blackened by fire. Inside, beneath a collapsed roof, lie the remains of something extraordinary. Jet engines sleek, unfamiliar, and decades ahead of their time. A Soviet colonel, his uniform caked in dust, brushes off a scorched data plate. The name reads, Junkers Jumo 004 turbine engine, model 004B. He stares for a moment, realization dawning. The Germans had built planes that flew faster than sound itself could travel to chase them. Across Europe, the same scene repeats. In Bavaria, an American technical intelligence unit uncovers a collection of rocket prototypes and swept-wing jet designs papers stamped Messerschmitt AG, Augsburg. Among them, a drawing labeled P-1101, a jet fighter with wings that could change angle mid-flight. A variable geometry dream that looks nothing like anything in the skies of 1945, but everything like the future. A young U.S. Army engineer whispers, "We're too late." They were already there. Meanwhile, in a small town east of Berlin, Soviet NKVD officers round up German scientists. Some surrender willingly, others are given no choice. Among them are propulsion experts from Junkers and aerodynamics specialists from the once secret Luftfahrtverschutz, LFA. They are transported under guard to the Soviet zone, their fates sealed behind iron rails. One of them, Brunolf Bad, a brilliant aeronautical engineer, stands silently on the platform as his wife and children are left behind. The guards shove him into a train bound east. He will never work for Germany again, only for Stalin's vision of the skies. At the same moment in Moscow, a different drama unfolds. Inside the dim corridors of the Kremlin, Joseph Stalin listens to his generals argue over the lessons of the war. His Air Force, brave but technologically behind, had bled terribly against the Luftwaffe. Now, with Berlin in ashes, Stalin's eyes turn not to tanks or artillery, but to the air. The Red Air Force will never be outmatched again. He gives a quiet order, "Bring me the men who built Hitler's jets. They will now build mine." Weeks later, trainloads of equipment engines, blueprints, half-assembled fuselages arrive in the Soviet Union under armed escort. Soviet engineers unpack the relics of the Reich, their faces half-lit by the flickering light of makeshift workshops. The names on the crates read, Messerschmitt, Heinkel, BMW Flugmotorenwerk. It is the birth of a new era, forged from the ruins of the old. In those ruins lies the seed of a machine that will soon dominate the skies from Korea to the edge of space. The MiG-15, a jet born of Nazi science, refined by Soviet ambition and destined to terrify the West. Autumn 1945. The war has ended, but the battle for knowledge has just begun. Across Europe, the victors divide not only territories but minds. From the ruins of Peenemünde and Dessau to the laboratories of Göttingen, engineers and physicists are quietly escorted away in trucks without insignia. The Americans call their operation Paperclip. The Soviets have no name, for there's only silence and fear. At an abandoned airfield in Thuringia, a Soviet convoy halts before dawn. Inside the lead truck, German engineers sit shoulder to shoulder, wrapped in overcoats. They are exhausted, frightened, and uncertain. A young Soviet major, his pistol holstered but his authority absolute, steps inside. "You are no longer in Germany," he says. "You work for us now." The door slams shut, and the convoy rolls east. Among the men is Adolf Bisman, the brilliant aerodynamicist who first conceived of the swept wing, an idea once dismissed as fantasy, now seen as the key to supersonic flight. His papers, hastily packed into a crate, are worth more than gold. The Soviets don't yet know it, but their prize lies not only in metal, but in the mathematics of airflow, the secret of speed itself. Meanwhile, in Moscow, a young Soviet designer named Artem Mikoyan studies a pile of captured German blueprints spread across his drafting table. The documents are stained, torn, and stamped Geheim. Next to him stands Mikhail Gurevich, older, quieter, with the sharp patience of a scientist. Together, they have designed fighters that carried the Red Star to victory, but never with the elegance or power of the German jets now lying before them. Mikoyan runs his fingers across a schematic of a swept-wing aircraft. He turns to Gurevich. "They built this in '44? Gurevich nods. "And we're still flying propellers." The two men share a look of cold determination. "The MiG Design Bureau will change that." In a secret test facility outside Kazan, Soviet engineers disassemble the captured Junkers Juno 004 and BMW 003 engines, mapping each blade, each fuel line, each bearing. They are amazed and infuriated in equal measure. How had the Germans built this under bombardment? The metallurgy is advanced, the tolerances are microscopic. Even the alloys are beyond what Soviet factories can replicate. A chief engineer slams his hand on the table. They built this with slave labor and it still outperforms anything we have. Stalin's order is clear. Copy it, improve it, fly it. But the Soviets are not alone in their pursuit. Across the Atlantic, in Dayton, Ohio, the captured German scientist Hans von Ohain, the man behind the world's first operational jet engine, now works under U.S. supervision. The Americans have the luxury of open laboratories and plentiful funding. The Soviets have fear, hunger, and secrecy. Yet necessity, as always, breeds obsession. By 1946, Mikoyan's team begins sketching a prototype I-310 swept-wing jet fighter inspired by German designs but shaped by Soviet vision. It is compact, aggressive, and brutally efficient. The only problem: the Soviet Union still lacks a working engine powerful enough to lift it. Without that, the dream of the new jet remains nothing more than ink on paper. In November 1946, Stalin summons the Minister of Aviation to the Kremlin. The air inside the Marble Hall is cold, the atmosphere colder. The Americans and British already fly jets, Stalin says, his voice quiet, deliberate. The Germans nearly conquered the sky. I will not be third. His eyes narrow. Find a way. Anyway, that single command will soon send Soviet officials to London, to the unlikeliest of deals, the one that will hand Stalin the very engine he needs to power his jet revolution. The dawn of the MiG begins not in Moscow, but in England. London, 1946. Rain falls in thin silver sheets across Whitehall. Inside the Ministry of Supply, a delegation from the Soviet Union sits in silence as British officials shuffle papers, sip tea, and avoid each other's eyes. The war has barely ended, yet the politics of the next one are already forming in the air, thick, unseen, and radioactive. At the head of the Soviet delegation sits Artem Mikoyan's envoy, a calm but relentless negotiator named Sergei Alexeyev. His instructions from Moscow are clear: secure jet engines, whatever the cost. The British, meanwhile, find themselves in a moral fog. Stalin is no longer an ally, but not yet an enemy. The Cold War has no name, no front lines, only unease. On the table between them lies a single folder marked Rolls-Royce Nane, turbojet engine. Developed by Rolls-Royce's genius designer Sir Stanley Hooker, the Nane is the most advanced jet engine in the world, small, reliable, and immensely powerful. It is the beating heart of Britain's new post-war air ambitions. Alexeyev opens the folder, scans the specifications, and looks up. This is what we need, he says simply. The Soviet Union wishes to purchase the Nane for peaceful development. The word peaceful hangs in the air like a knife. To the astonishment of history, Britain agrees. Prime Minister Clement Attlee, advised by his Minister of Trade, authorizes the sale of 25 Nane engines to the USSR. The reasoning is naive but politically convenient, an act of scientific goodwill to maintain relations with Moscow. No one in the room imagines that these engines will soon roar beneath Soviet wings, over the battlefields of Korea. The deal is signed. Crates marked agricultural machinery are loaded into Soviet cargo planes at an airfield in Gloucestershire. The British customs officers stamp the papers and wave them through. A Rolls-Royce engineer watching from the hangar mutters under his breath, God help us if they ever figure out how to build one. Back in Moscow, the crates are unloaded under heavy guard and transported to the Klimov Design Bureau. There, engineers strip down the Nane piece by piece in silence. They study, measure, and duplicate every component. Within months, the Soviets have built an almost perfect copy, the Klimov RD-45, an engine as powerful as its British parent but modified to Soviet materials and methods. In effect, Britain has just handed Stalin the key to the jet age. In early 1947, Mikoyan and Gurevich finally have what they need. The I-310 prototype, sleek, swept, and compact, is fitted with the new RD-45. Its nose intake feeds directly into the turbine. The wings are angled at 35 degrees, borrowing from both German aerodynamics and Soviet instinct. It looks nothing like any fighter the world has seen. On a bitter winter morning at the airfield near Zhukovsky, the jet is towed into the open. Frost glitters on its silver fuselage. Test pilot Vladimir Yuganov straps in, checks the controls, and gives a terse thumbs up. The engine ignites with a deep metallic growl. Snow blows sideways across the runway as the I-310 accelerates. The roar builds, the wings lift, and suddenly against the gray Soviet sky it rises. The Soviet Union has its first truly modern jet fighter. Mikoyan watches from the ground, his breath forming clouds in the cold. Beside him, a senior officer leans forward and says quietly, "What will we call it?" Mikoyan answers without hesitation. MiG-15. That same year Stalin receives word of the flight. He reads the report in silence, then sets it down on his desk. Outside, Moscow's streets glisten with ice, the city rebuilding itself from ashes. "Good," he says finally. "Now let the West see what we can do." The MiG-15 will not remain a secret for long. Soon, its silver wings will streak across the skies of Eastern Europe and one day, across Korea, where it will meet the West head-on in the first jet versus jet battles of history. The balance of power in the air has shifted. Spring 1948. The snows of the Russian steppe are melting. At the airfield in Zhukovsky, the MiG-15 glints in the pale sun, its swept wings catching the light like a blade. Around it, mechanics swarm in padded coats, their breath clouding the morning air. The jet's skin, polished aluminum, seems alive, a metallic predator about to take flight. The Soviets have done what no one thought possible. They've caught up. Inside the control bunker, Artem Mikoyan and Mikhail Gurevich stand shoulder to shoulder, watching the monitors flicker. It's the culmination of years of sleepless nights, fear, and furious innovation. The I-310 prototype has become a weapon. "It's not just a plane," Gurevich murmurs. "It's a message." The first MiG-15 squadron is assigned to a secret base near Kubyshev. Their orders: fly, test, and report. Each flight pushes the machine closer to its limits and its pilots to the edge of survival. The plane is unlike anything they've known. It accelerates like a bullet, climbs almost vertically, and can tear through cloud banks before a man can blink. But it also punishes error. At high speeds, controls lock. At sharp dives, wings threaten to shear away. Test pilot Ivan Ivasenko, one of the first to master it, returns from a harrowing flight pale and trembling. "It's fast," he gasps. Too fast for the human body. The engineers take notes, adjust, reinforce, test again. Each failure is written in blood and courage. Across Europe, Soviet airfields fill with the gleaming new jets. The MiG-15 becomes a symbol of rebirth, of industrial power and military pride. Its swept wings mirror the Reich's long-dead dreams, but its red star is now the symbol of a new empire. When Stalin visits a demonstration at Kubinka Air Base, he watches in silence as a formation of MiG-15s streak overhead, roaring like thunder. "Comrade Mikoyan," he says finally, turning to the designer, "you've built more than a plane. You've built fear." Mikoyan bows his head. He knows the meaning of that word. But beyond Soviet borders, the West begins to notice. In the skies over Eastern Europe, Allied reconnaissance pilots catch flashes of silver at impossible altitudes. Radar operators at U.S. bases in Germany report new aircraft flying higher and faster than any American jet. The CIA begins collecting fragments of rumor, a mysterious swept-wing fighter now in production across the Soviet bloc. In Washington, air intelligence analysts pore over grainy photos and uncertain reports. One memo reads, "The Soviets appear to have developed a jet fighter capable of Mach 0.9. Performance exceeds any current. Western design except perhaps the F-86 Sabre." The realization spreads like wildfire through the Pentagon. The United States is no longer the unquestioned master of the air. Meanwhile, in Prague and Warsaw, MiG-15s arrive by train, wrapped in canvas and mystery. Eastern Bloc pilots Czechoslovak Polish. East German receive Soviet instructors and strict orders. "You do not speak of what you see." To the pilots who climb into the cockpit for the first time, it feels like stepping into the future. "It was as if you strapped yourself to a rocket," recalls Czech pilot Václav KRL years later. No piston engine could even dream of catching it. By late 1949, the MiG-15 is operational. The Soviet Union unveils it publicly for the first time during the Tushino Air Show. Western diplomats in attendance watch in disbelief as the silver jets scream overhead in perfect formation. They are fast, graceful, and unmistakably deadly. One British observer whispers to another, "They've leapfrogged us. God help the next war." And that next war is already forming on the horizon. Half a world away, a divided peninsula in Asia is about to ignite. When it does, the MiG-15 will emerge from the clouds, red stars blazing on its wings to meet its Western rival in the first great jewel of the jet age. The battlefield will be Korea. June 1950, Korea burns. The Korean peninsula, divided after World War II along the 38th parallel, has exploded into open war. North Korean troops, backed quietly by Stalin and trained by Soviet advisors, sweep south in a lightning assault. Seoul falls in days. The United States and its allies scramble to respond under the banner of the United Nations. The jet age has arrived on the battlefield. At first, the skies belonged to the Americans. USAF F-80 Shooting Stars and F-84 Thunderjets slice through the clouds, their machine guns raking North Korean columns. They fly low, bold, and unchallenged. But far to the north, across the Yalu River in Manchuria, something new is stirring. October 1950. A formation of unfamiliar silver aircraft appears high above the Yalu. They move too fast for the F-80s to catch. Their wings are sharply swept, their noses open like intakes of a predator. The American pilots give chase. They fail. They went straight up, one pilot radios back, voice trembling. Like a damn rocket. The first combat appearance of the MiG-15. From secret airfields near Antong in Manchuria, Soviet pilots wearing Chinese uniforms and speaking only coded Russian over the radio begin flying missions. Their orders come directly from Moscow. Defend the Yalu. Deny the Americans the sky. The pilots belong to the elite 324th Fighter Division, commanded by Colonel Ivan Kosetub, a legendary ace of the Great Patriotic War. His men are veterans, trained killers now reborn in the jet age. They call their hunting ground MiG-15’s, the stretch of sky above the Yalu River where death comes fast and invisible. Early encounters are devastating. The MiG-15 outclimbs outerns and outruns every American jet except one, the newly arrived F-86 Sabre. But the Sabre is still rare, and most U.S. pilots fly the slower F-80s. The result is slaughter. In November, a MiG ambush shreds a formation of B-29 bombers attempting to strike bridges near Sinuiju. 4 bombers vanish in fireballs. Survivors limp home, riddled with cannon fire. U.S. intelligence scrambles for answers. The new jet's climb rate, altitude, and acceleration are beyond anything in the American inventory. General Hoyt Vandenberg reads the first report, his jaw tightening. We're fighting our own technology turned against us. He's right. The MiG's heart, the Rolls-Royce 9A engine, was born in Britain. Its swept wings came from German research. Its pilots are Soviet. The Cold War has found its sharpest edge. Above the Yalu, the duels become legend. MiG versus Sabre, East versus West. 2 jets, mirror images, each descended from the same wartime science, now killing under rival flags. American ace James Jabara remembers his first encounter. He came out of the sun like lightning. I pulled hard, but he just went vertical straight up. That's when I knew we were in a different kind of war. In Moscow, the news reaches Stalin. He listens as his air marshals report successful missions under the fiction that Chinese and Korean pilots fly the MiGs. In truth, the best Soviet aces are in the cockpit men who once defended Moscow, now dueling Americans thousands of miles away. Stalin smiles faintly. Let the world believe what it wants, he says. Only the results matter. For the first time, the West feels fear in the skies. American bombers must now strike by night, low and cautious. Pilots whisper the name MiG like a curse. Over the next year, MiG-15s will claim hundreds of victories, rewriting the rules of air combat. The jet born from the ashes of Nazi Germany now rules the cold skies of Asia, its roar echoing across the mountains, its shadow stretching from the Yalu to the Pentagon. The balance of power in the air has shifted again. And for the first time, the United States realizes it is not untouchable. Winter 1951. Over the frozen mountains of North Korea, the sky itself has become a battlefield, cold, clean, and merciless. The war on the ground drags through mud and misery, but above the clouds, a new kind of war is being born, the first true jet versus jet conflict in human history. The MiG-15 reigns supreme north of the Yalu River. Its swept wings slice the thin air at near the speed of sound. Its cannons thunder with terrifying precision. 2 23mm and one massive 37mm gun that can shred a bomber in a single burst. But the Americans have sent their answer. The F-86 Sabre. At Suwon Air Base, South Korea, the Sabres are prepped before dawn. Ground crews in heavy parkas scrape frost from the canopies, while pilots in silver flight suits brief over maps. Covered with red lines, the edge of MiG Alley. They know what's waiting for them beyond the river. Soviet-trained killers, flying machines that seem untouchable. Captain James "Jabby" Jabara, a wiry Kansas-born pilot with a fighter's grin, pulls his gloves tight. He's not chasing history, but survival. If we're gonna take back the sky, he mutters, we'll have to outthink the bastards, not outfly them. 10,000 meters above the Yalu, the contrails of 2 nations twist across, the blue void, thin white scars of human will. A formation of sabres climbs from the south, sunlight flashing on their wings. From the north, MiGs descend, silent and fast as falling stars. The battle begins in a blur of motion. Jabara spots a MiG cutting across his tail. He yanks the stick, feels the G-forces crush his chest. The MiG overshoots just barely. The Saber's 6.50 caliber machine guns roar. A streak of fire, a burst of smoke, and a red star tumbles from the sky. Jabara has just scored his first kill. He will soon become America's first jet ace. But in the Soviet camps across the river, the victories are mounting too. Major Nikolai Sutyagin, one of the USSR's most skilled pilots, racks up kills with quiet efficiency. His men fly under Chinese markings, their Russian identities erased by order of the Kremlin. They are ghosts of a war that does not exist. Sutyagin studies captured fragments of Saber wreckage between missions. He respects his enemies and fears none. They have good planes, he tells his comrades. But they fly them like Americans, too confident. He smiles thinly. Confidence burns fast at Mach 0.9. The duels intensify. Each side adapts, each learns. The Saber's hydraulically boosted controls give it agility at high speeds. The MiG's ceiling and climb rate dominate above 40,000 feet. Dogfights spiral through thin, freezing air, sometimes ending with both aircraft crashing into the same gray sea of clouds, victims of their own momentum. The sky has become a chessboard of death. No mercy, no room for error. Back in Moscow, engineers work feverishly to refine the MiG's design. The new MiG-15’s model rolls out stronger engine, improved hydraulics, and radar gunsight. Each improvement is rushed straight to the front lines. In the Kremlin, Stalin reads the reports with cold satisfaction. The MiG, his miracle weapon, is proving its worth. But he warns his generals. We are not to exist there. Not officially. If they die as shadows. And so the Soviet pilots fly invisible, unacknowledged, and undefeated. For the men who duel above Korea, the experience borders on the surreal. They chase one another through thin air at 900 kilometers per hour, trading bursts of cannon and tracers faster than thought. The old chivalry of the Spitfire and Messerschmitt is gone. Now combat is mathematical, physics, pressure, reflex. Each mission tests the limits of man and machine. The future of aerial warfare is being written in vapor trails and blood. By year's end, the balance is delicate. The Americans claim air superiority. The Soviets, secrecy and pride. Neither side knows the other's true losses. Both know one thing: the world has crossed a line that can never be uncrossed. The age of the propeller has ended. The age of the jet has begun. Spring 1952. The war in Korea grinds on, but in the air, something deeper unfolds. A silent contest of intellect, instinct, and ideology. Above the Yalu River, Meg Ali has become the deadliest stretch of sky on Earth. Every sortie is a gamble, every cloud a possible ambush. The Americans no longer underestimate their enemy. They've learned the truth, whispered through intelligence channels and confirmed by captured pilots. The MiG-15's are flown not by Koreans or Chinese but by Russians. The Cold War has gone hot, just high enough that the world can't see the fire. At Andong Air Base in Manchuria, Soviet pilots live double lives. They wear Chinese uniforms, carry Chinese identification papers, and paint over the Cyrillic on their aircraft. But inside their barracks, they speak Russian, read Russian newspapers, and follow Russian orders. Each day begins with the same command: you are not here. Their radio call signs are meaningless code words: Falcon, Storm, Red 5. Their mission logs are falsified, their victories buried in secret reports stamped top secret. One pilot jokes bitterly, "We fight like lions, but history will never know our names." He is wrong. Decades later, their names will surface. Sutyagin, Papelyav, Fedorez, Kremarenko. Ghosts return from the Cold War's hidden air war. Meanwhile, at Suwon and Kimpo air bases in South Korea, the Saber pilots sharpen their craft. They now know the MiG's habits, its weaknesses. A Saber can't climb as fast, but it can roll and dive harder. The fight has become one of psychology: who sees first, who maneuvers smarter, who fires the decisive burst at the edge of blackout. Lieutenant George Davis, quiet and fearless, leads his wing through MiG Alley with unmatched precision. He knows the risks, and he keeps flying anyway. In February 1952, Davis downs his 14th MiG, then another, before he's caught in a counterattack. His jet explodes midair. He never ejects. The Americans will call him a hero. The Soviets will never know his name. In Moscow, Artem Mikoyan watches test footage of MiG-15's returning from Korea. The once prototype now defines Soviet pride. The proof that Stalin's dream of parity with the West has been achieved. Yet Mikoyan sees flaws the generals ignore: compressibility at transonic speeds, stability problems, the strain on pilots who fight at the edge of human endurance. He begins sketching something new, sleeker, faster, more stable. The MiG-17 evolution of the legend. But for now, the MiG-15 rules the skies. A weapon born of stolen science, refined by desperation, and baptized in the flames of a proxy war. The United States responds with technology of its own. Radar gun sights, high-altitude tactics, wingtip fuel tanks for extended combat endurance. The race between engineers mirrors the dogfights above Korea. Brutal, relentless, and invisible to those on the ground. Each side builds, adapts, counteracts. Each is haunted by the same realization. The future of the world may depend on what flies faster, the machine or the mind that built it. By late 1952, the air war has become a grim routine. Squadrons rise from their bases each dawn, cross the Yalu, and vanish into the haze. Sometimes they return, sometimes not. The ground crews stop painting names on the fuselages. Too many pilots gone, too few left to remember. The MiGs fly higher. The Sabres chase harder. Above them both, the sound barrier looms, an invisible frontier that neither side can yet conquer. But the lessons learned here, in smoke and blood, will shape the next decade of warfare. And in the shadows of those duels, a new age of secrecy is born. An age of espionage, of spies and stolen blueprints, of nations racing to outthink one another not on the battlefield, but in the laboratory. The MiG-15 has opened the door. The Cold War will walk through it. 1948, a cold dawn over Moscow. The Kremlin clock ticks toward a new kind of war, one that will never be declared, yet will decide the balance of the planet. The atomic bomb has made the world tremble. But in the skies above, a different race has begun. In the hangars of Gorky and Novosibirsk, the MiG-15 takes form, sleek, swept, metallic. Engineers in heavy coats circle around the prototype, the breath from their mouths mingling with the mist of kerosene. Each rivet, each bolt, is a quiet defiance of the West. Across the ocean, in California and Ohio, the Americans work just as feverishly. The F-86 Sabre emerges from wind tunnels, a mirror image of Soviet ambition. Both sides chase the same dream: speed, altitude, supremacy. It is no longer about nations. It is about who can dominate the stratosphere. Behind locked doors, Soviet pilots train in absolute secrecy. Their flight logs carry false names. The briefings are whispered. The first tests are brutal. Engines explode, wings shear off at supersonic speeds. But slowly, the machine proves itself. The MiG-15 is unlike anything the Red Air Force has ever seen. It climbs like a bullet. Its cannon can tear a bomber apart with a single burst. In March 1949, the prototype streaks over the snowfields outside Moscow. The ground crews freeze in awe. The jet seems to slice the sky itself. Word spreads to the west through spies and whispers. They have it now. The swept-wing jet. That same year, the Berlin airlift unfolds. American and British transports bring food into a starving city, while Soviet fighters circle above, silent warnings in the sky. But Stalin does not give the order to strike. Not yet. The Cold War takes its first breath, not with gunfire, but with engines. By 1950, crates stamped with Cyrillic letters are loaded onto trains bound for China. The world does not know it yet, but the next chapter will begin not in Europe, but over Korea. The MiG-15, born from German science and Soviet will, is about to meet its true test against the best pilots of the United States Air Force, a duel of ideologies, written in vapor trails and fire. Winter 1950. The Yalu River freezes over, a ribbon of silver between China and the burning Korea. Above it, the sky belongs to no one. Columns of vapor stretch across the pale horizon, the signatures of a new kind of war. Here, at 40,000 feet, the Soviet-made MiG-15 meets its mirror, the American F-86 Sabre. They call it Meg Alley. Each morning, the sirens wail from the airfields of Antung. Soviet pilots, disguised in Chinese uniforms, climb into cockpits marked with red stars. Their mission is silent, deniable, and absolute: to challenge the West's mastery of the air. Engines howl across the Manchurian snow. The jets lift into the dawn, wings slicing through clouds still heavy with gunpowder from the night before. On the southern side of the Yalu, American pilots scramble from Kaimpo and Suwon. Some are veterans of Europe, others fresh from Texas skies. All of them know this: in the thin air above the river, there are no borders, only hunters and hunted. The Meg climbs faster, higher, its swept wings cutting through the stratosphere like a blade. The Sabre dives smoother, steadier, its gun sights deadlier, its pilots battle-hardened. The first clash lasts barely a minute. Two silver shapes spiral through the blue void, their contrails twisting into white knots. Then, a burst of cannon fire, and silence. A black streak falls toward the frozen ground. Major George Davis radios calmly, "Splash 1 meg." But for every meg down, another takes its place. The Soviet squadrons, honchos, the Americans whisper, fight with ruthless precision. They vanish across the Yalu after each engagement, untouchable, invisible. In Moscow, Stalin listens to coded reports. The MiG's triumphs are whispered through corridors lined with marble and fear. In Washington, the Pentagon studies fragments of MiG wreckage and finds something chilling: designs that trace back to Nazi Germany's final days. In the wreckage of 1 meg, engineers uncover familiar signatures: Messerschmitt curves, Junkers metallurgy, German math reborn in Russian steel. The duel becomes a prophecy. What began as stolen blueprints has become the balance of the Cold War. By 1951, neither side holds the sky. The meg and the saber twist, dive, and kill, equals locked in a circle of death. The pilots speak different tongues, but their screams sound the same through the static. On the ground, Korean villagers look up at the vapor trails like chalk lines across heaven. Each one marks another life erased. War, once fought with nations, is now fought with machines, and men whose faces the world will never know. The MiG-15, forged from Nazi science and Soviet ambition, has done its part. It has terrified the West, reshaped the future, and drawn the first clear battle line of the jet age. 1953, the guns fall silent over Korea. Smoke still clings to the hills, and the sky, once a battlefield of vapor trails, is empty at last. At the airfield of Antung, rows of MiG-15's stand in silence. Their aluminum skins are scorched and patched, their cannon barrels cooled by the morning mist. Mechanics walk among them like priests after a ritual. The war has ended, but its shadow stretches far beyond the Yalu. In the West, the Sabre pilots return home as heroes. They speak of a worthy enemy, an invisible one. Few know that many of those Chinese and North Korean pilots were, in truth, Soviet aces, men who never existed on paper, whose names were erased from history. The Cold War has begun its long freeze. In secret design bureaus from Seattle to Siberia, engineers study the lessons of the duel. The MiG-15 becomes the seed of every jet that follows: the MiG-17, MiG-19, and then the fabled MiG-21. Across the ocean, America answers with the F-100, the F-4, and later, the F-15, each born from the same question that haunted those skies: who will rule the air? Yet behind the triumphs of technology lies a darker truth. The swept-wing miracle that defined the jet age began not in Moscow or Washington, but in the ruins of Germany, in laboratories buried under bombed-out cities, in notebooks smuggled from Peenemünde, in equations scribbled by scientists who never lived to see what their work would become. In a way, the MiG-15 is the ghost of two wars, born from the ashes of one, matured in the flames of another. By the time the world moves on, the Meg has flown under dozens of flags. It becomes the jet of revolutions, of proxy wars, of nations struggling to be heard. From Vietnam to the Middle East, its silhouette appears again and again, simple, deadly, timeless. But for those who first flew it, the Meg was never just a weapon. It was a symbol of pride, of fear, of a world forever divided. One Soviet pilot, years later, would write in his journal, "When I flew the Meg, I felt as if the whole weight of the motherland sat on my shoulders. We carried not bombs, but ideology itself." And in that single sentence lies the true legacy of the MiG-15. Not just a machine, but a messenger. A message carved in metal saying, "We too can touch the sky." From the ashes of Nazi Germany to the snows of Korea, the MiG story is the story of the century itself. A tale of stolen science, ruthless ambition, and the endless race for supremacy. The iron wings of the East had risen, and the world would never fly the same way again.